Welcome to February Fireside Chat here with Samantha Shank. I'm so excited to be sitting down with her today. We are going down the rabbit hole of unconventional pathways that people take in their lives. And Samantha's going to share her story with us today. She kind of did things a little bit opposite and backwards, as she put it. And so normally you often hear the story of people who do corporate and then they quit and then they try to pursue solopreneurship or entrepreneurship, but she kind of did it the other way around. So we're going to hear about her journey today. And so I'm just going to throw it over to you and I'll let you introduce yourself, where you're from, where you're currently located, just a little bit more about you.
Hi, my name is Samantha Shank. I was adopted from China and I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana for the majority of my life. In 2022, I realized that life is short and I didn't want to die in the Midwest. It was a long story revolving around that, but I decided I wanted more out of my life. And so I packed up my little Prius and my one-eyed dog, and we drove from South Bend, Indiana to Los Angeles, California. And since then, I've been to over 20 different countries financing this. I started a business when I was 14 years old, and I was able to do that remotely and virtually for the vast majority of my life. And it allowed me so much flexibility. But like, as you said, I've noticed that after all of my travels, I'm wanting a little bit more stability. And that's kind of leading me to the opposite of what I feel like everybody else is doing. I know everybody is wanting to quit their job and travel the world. And having done all of that, I realized I'm like, hey, the other side actually isn't bad, isn't that bad. So that's kind of where I'm at in life.
Okay. Okay, wait. I must have missed it just as you were going through it, but like what year did you start all your travels? Like you've now managed to hit 20 countries. How long has it been?
It's only been since 2022. So
2022. Oh my gosh, so you've done
yeah,
a lot.
all of my travels have been in the past 3, 4 years.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay. Incredible.
Yeah.
Although I'm also curious, we'll just dive into it a little bit. Like, were any of them like clustered into like one region of the world?
Yes, so a couple of them were. I went to Asia a year and a half ago. Yeah, about a year and a half ago, and I went to I think 7 or 8 countries over a course of 3 or 4 months. I don't remember the specifics, but that's one of the ways that I've been able to save a lot of money is because like if I was just going from LA to Singapore and LA to Malaysia, it's just so expensive, and I don't have the type of
Totally.
money. And yeah, that was one big cluster, and then Latin America has been another cluster, just because in
Okay.
between other countries in Latin America, it was very inexpensive to travel to. But if you're traveling from LA to Costa Rica, LA to Guatemala, it's so expensive and it adds up so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, yeah, that's a travel tip for anyone.
Yeah.
If you're able to if you're able to take the time, it's always
Yeah.
like take advantage of the fact that you're in that part of the world because it's true. Like going back to your home base is always nice to like refresh your clothes and like see friends and
Mhm.
family and get a taste of home and like comfort yourself if you have any of that homesickness, but also it's like extremely not efficient and it's
Mhm.
also really expensive. Yeah. But okay, that's really cool.
And I feel
And
like
then
at
yeah.
least in the United States, I feel like the United States is the most expensive to travel to. Like for example, if I'm going from LA to New York or LA to Miami, those tickets are significantly more expensive than traveling from like Singapore to Hong Kong or from the Netherlands to Paris. And so I feel like Americans have this mindset of, oh, the ticket's going to be $500. But in reality, it's very inexpensive to travel those countries. America's just a little bit expensive behind. I don't know the term, but I think Americans have that mindset at least. At least I did when I first started until I realized how
Yeah, yeah,
inexpensive
yeah.
it was.
I think Canada and US are the similar in that way because we don't have very many like domestic carriers, and so there's not as much
Yeah,
competition, and
I
so it
think
makes
that's what.
domestic flying really expensive. Yeah. So I totally get it. Not
Yeah.
many Canadians travel domestically either. But
Yeah,
okay,
because it's so
cool.
expensive.
Yeah. But thank you for introing yourself. Let's talk a little bit about how you found out about Asian Wonder Women and what this community has meant for you and done for you.
Oh my gosh, I love Asian Wonder Woman. I'm so excited to be featured because I love this community so much. I was working on a startup in 2022 also. It was like a couch surfing platform for females. I ended up shelving it, but it's something I would definitely like to come back to because I'm super passionate about it. And I posted about it on Asian Hustle Network, I believe. And Emily Yang had reached out to me. She's one of the founders of it. And we got connected. I really liked her. It turns out she was like from Torrance or grew up in Torrance. And she was really cool. And she invited me to the group. And since then, I've met so many amazing women from there. I've actually traveled from one of with one of the girls on there, like complete stranger at the time. And it made a lot of really good connections. And I met up with a lot of women from the group. And I love it because it's so niche. It's women who are frankly badass. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on here, but
No, you're fine.
okay. Women who are complete badasses. They are incredibly intelligent. They love travel and they're very ambitious. And I feel like, and we're Asian, and I feel like those are all very specific niches. Growing up, I didn't have anyone around me who was like me in any aspect of life, let alone all of the aspects of life. And just like that community, I instantly felt at home with every single person I've met on there.
That's incredible. So wait, through Asian Hustle Network, you found Asian Wonder Women?
Yes.
That's great. I'm glad these communities are all like interconnected. It's great. We're all supporting each other.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've repped Asian Wonder Woman several times in these Asian groups. I'm like, girl, you need to join us. Like, I think you'd fit in really well with this community.
That's awesome. Yeah, actually someone I met recently while on my travels asked me like, why specifically do you need a group that's for Asian women specifically?
Yeah.
And like why is this the thing that connects you all and why is this important? Because like there are many travel groups for women, for
Yeah.
example, but then this one is niche to Asian women. And I was like, it actually makes a huge difference. I
I
actually feel like
agree.
it makes a huge, huge difference. It's kind of hard to put into words, but it's kind of a feeling of immediate understanding and connectedness. And
Yeah.
then just like a mutual foundational understanding of like cultural upbringing and like cultural needs and just like not having to explain ourselves and then going through
Yeah.
similar difficulties while traveling as well. Just being like everyone's heard the same cat calls of like either konnichiwa
Oh,
or like ni hao, right? Like
yes.
everyone like
That was what I was
everyone has heard
gonna
them.
say.
So we
Yeah.
all know the struggle. So like
Yeah.
it's just like this connectedness. So it makes a huge difference. So I'm glad you found like a lot of uh good, what's the word I'm looking for, like a lot of support and you feel really like
Support.
connected, yeah, with the community, so
Absolutely.
that's been really good to hear. And then you have mentioned now that you've been nomadic now for almost a year, and
Hmm.
so you've done it in, you told me previously, in an unconventional and untraditional way, so I'd like to talk about what that means and why did you go down the route to go down this nomadic lifestyle.
I going back to my puppy, my dog. He wasn't a puppy; he was an old man. I had adopted him when he was older, and he passed away in December of 2022.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Um, yes, that was really rough, mentally and everything. He was like my whole entire life, and during like after that, I had gotten an apartment, and I was realizing I was gone quite a bit. And at the time, I was subletting my place a lot. I was unfortunately because I lived in LA and it was a very high demand area, and my roommate was chill, pretty chill. I was able to do that for like a month at a time or like a couple weeks at a time. It just ended up becoming kind of a pain because she was getting annoyed because there was an endless like group of
Because
like
I
new
was like a
women in the room.
stranger. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just kind of becoming a pain. And in the midst of in between all those travels, I had a lot of dog sits that I was doing. And in these dog sits, I found this niche with senior dogs. And with senior dogs comes a lot of the people actually want me in their home just because it's a senior. I work with a lot of dogs who are blind, deaf, or who have other type of disabilities, and it's just more comfortable if they're in their home. So I had found this niche in the rover wag dog sitting community. And between all that, I realized I was only sleeping at home about 4 nights a week, and it was just not financially conducive to do both. And in March 2023, I decided, hey, March 2024, sorry, it was last year. I decided, hey, let me try this nomadic thing. So I've been doing it for almost a year now, considering it's mid-February. And I don't see any plans of stopping. Like I mentioned, the corporate job would help a lot just because it would replace the dog sitting income, and it would give me a little bit more stability. But other than that, I mean, I found a really good, interesting pattern in my lifestyle. So my Prius is loaded up with everything I need, and in between there, yeah.
So then did you start the dog sitting after your dog had passed? Is that what happened?
I was dog sitting a little bit with him. I just put on my profile, hey, my dog, he's fine with other dogs. He just has to come with me. So he at the time was blind, deaf, anxious, had all of these like medical problems going on.
Yeah.
And he just needed to be with me. And every time that I left the house, I would just either gray him or bring him back to my home. But at the time, all my clients were really fine with it because their dogs were also really good at dogs. We did a meet and greet and it was fine. Um, And then by that time I had already built myself like a pretty steady clientele, and I already made a name for myself specifically with senior dogs. And that's kind of the path I had taken with dog sitting.
And then did you pursue dog sitting just like on a whim? Like, why did you think of pursuing that?
I love dogs. I didn't grow up with dogs. I started it back in Indiana because I was on my computer all the time. I was working quite a bit. So as I was building Learn and Color, I was working like 12-hour days, like 7 days a week. I was just completely like going crazy with everything. And it was basically starting to hurt my back. I have very bad posture and I prefer sitting on the couch instead of a desk, frankly. And I just started dog walking for the exercise because my own dog, again, being a senior, he was kind of lazy. He
Hmm.
didn't like those like longer walks. And I'm like, I need to like get out of bed and do something with my life because my back frankly hurts.
Get
But
those
I got
steps
that
in.
started. Yeah, I got started in Indiana, and then I did it a little bit when I moved out here, and then it started when I moved into a more populated area. Because I started off in a smaller community in the Los Angeles area, like right outside LA, and then when I moved into LA proper, my requests just skyrocketed.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think there's, yeah, maybe a lot of like gig jobs that people don't think to pursue. And
Yeah.
like, I never thought about pet sitting. I think about house sitting sometimes because
Mm-hmm.
I'm always looking for like a fun new way to look for cheaper accommodations. So I've thought about
Yeah.
house sitting a few times, but I've never thought about pet sitting because I've never had a dog. So I'm like, I don't know. I know that I wouldn't trust you with my dog if you've never had a dog kind of thing.
Oh no,
So I'm
that's
like,
fair.
I don't trust people to trust me with their dogs, but I'm like, you could trust me with your cat. Cats are okay.
Yeah, and there's sites like Trusted House Sitters.
Yeah.
There's a offshoot from the group Hostess Sister, which is for accommodation. There's one called Hostess Sister Pet Sitting. But when you are looking for it, like you just have to vet the person. I had used that several times when I was traveling and I needed someone to watch Champ. They just stayed at my house, and they were able to watch my dog and get free accommodations in LA. So it ended up working out for both of us.
Nice, nice. Yeah. It's like you help each other. It's mutually beneficial, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think we're gonna just like go out of order here. We have some like
Okay.
pre-prepared questions. If anyone wants to see behind the veil, we do prepare beforehand. But I'm just gonna go out of order a little bit because I do want to talk about Learn and Color because you've mentioned it a couple times now. So I just want to talk about your business and how you started that when you were 14 and you've been able to work on that full time and just tell us a little bit more about the business.
I was a nerd when I was a child, if that surprises anyone from this conversation. And I was really interested in history and World War II from about fourth grade. So very young. From K through 3, I was in public school, and I decided public school wasn't really for me. And I had to ask my parents if we could try homeschooling. They didn't know that much about homeschooling, but I ended up really enjoying it just because I like the personability aspect of it. I was able to personalize the curriculum a lot better.
Mm,
My sisters had done homeschooling after I had started for a few years, but they both ended up graduating from a public high school just because that's what worked better for them. But for me, I didn't want to attend a public high school. And my parents couldn't afford private school or anything like that. So for like me personally, homeschooling was the best option because I was able to work at my own pace. And at the time, I was able to read a lot about history. I was
mhm.
devouring several books a week about World War II, the Holocaust, the American Civil War. And at the time, people thought it was strange because I would be this quirky 12, 13, 14-year-old wanting to talk to you about these rougher topics. And in the Indiana and the Midwest, that's just not a thing. Since moving out here, I realized that if I were to talk to someone about that, people's responses would be different, but at least in the Midwest, the response I got was more negative than positive. But I was able to channel that energy and I started this blog. At the time, it was neon green because that was the color in 2013. So I started this neon green blog and I just started writing about World War II. And I started to get a following from that. It ended up being super random. I had gotten connected with some homeschool bloggers. I started to pave my way in this world, and I realized that you could make money blogging. And at the time, I had had a lot of success with my own Pinterest account and Facebook accounts. And a lady I saw in this Facebook group was asking, "Hey, I need someone to manage my social media." And I said, "Hey, I am doing nothing with my life. I will manage your social media for $12 an hour." And so I ended up growing her Pinterest account successfully, and she hired me for more projects. And then from that, I started to gain a portfolio. And in that, I was able to not only gain mentors because all of these ladies were like, "Oh, sure, like you work for me, you do a great job. If you need blog help, of course I'll help you out." I was able to gain community, and I learned that entrepreneurship was possible. Because at the time, I had been told that if you like history, the only jobs available to you were working at a museum or being a history teacher. And
Yeah, 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 yeah.
at the time, I didn't want to move to like Washington D.C. because I thought it was too big of a city. I live in LA now, but at the time, I'm like, I don't want to live in a big city, and I don't want to be a history teacher, so I'll just stick with this. A couple of years later, I was able to make a full-time income. I defined that by the median income of Indiana, which was only like $40,000.
Can I
But at
pause
the
you for
time,
1 second?
yeah,
What age are you at this point in this story?
I was 14 when I started, and I was 16, 17 by the time I made the full-time income.
Okay.
Yeah, so I made the full-time income, but at the time I was 16, 17, as defined by like Indiana's median income, which was $40,000. I had broken it down to a year. It's like, okay, if there's $36,000, each month I need to be making $3,000, which means each day I need to be making like what, $100. That's kind of how
Hmm.
I had broken down. I had made a plan of like, okay, this is what I need to do to make this happen. I needed money to like leave my home situation, and for certain reasons, like the outside job was not working because I was underage. There's a bunch of child labor laws, which I fully agree with, but at the time it was very difficult for
Restrictive for
me.
you. Yeah, yeah.
Restrictive, yeah. So I like basically put this plan in place and I made it happen. And then I worked my butt off from then until college. I graduated high school early. I started college when I was about 16. I
So
started,
then, does this mean you're homeschooling? It sounded to me when you were talking about it, like when you were younger, it also sounded like, was it a lot of it self-directed learning then?
yeah, I taught myself.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. It was almost entirely self-directed.
Mm,
And I think that, like, looking back, it taught me how to solve problems. I have always been really good at math until I hit like algebra 1, algebra 2, and then it just didn't come as naturally
yeah.
as all the other concepts did. And it forced me to Google things and to like look things up. Um, my sisters and I are very competitive. I'm very proud that I had a higher SAT score than both of them. They're
Yeah,
both
let's
extremely
go.
intelligent and like graduated in like the top 15 of their school, but I had a higher SAT score than them. Um, but I do credit that with just being very self-directed, and if I don't know something, I will figure it out from there.
Yeah, really
And that's helped me in
resourceful.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we jump back to the part of your story where you're now entering like post-secondary at the age of 16.
Yeah. So I was home for the first year of it. I was only taking like 6 or 12 credits. I don't remember. I was taking, oh, I think it was 12 credits that year in a dual enrollment type program. And I was still working on the business. And then when I was 17, I officially entered college. And then, like, on paper, I had technically graduated in 2.5 years. Most of that was for financial reasons. Um, there's a lot that goes into this story. I can go more in depth or whatever. There's a lot that goes into
It's
this.
however much you feel like sharing, really.
Okay. So, frankly, I had grown up in a cult. I attended a very religious post like undergraduate school, and I didn't really enjoy it there, so that really factored into me wanting to graduate early. It was very expensive, but my parents weren't helping me pay with school, so I had to kind of navigate that my own way. And I realized that the only way to kind of get out of the situation was I had to like graduate earlier. I was going to graduate with a significant amount of debt, and I really didn't want that, specifically with the interest, and it just didn't align with any of my future goals.
Mm,
So I was able to save like over $30,000 by graduating early. I had a lot of scholarships. I competed in pageants when I was younger, and that ended up helping me pay for school. And then I was just working my butt off with learning color. And then I was
okay.
taking a significant amount of credits. I was testing out of classes. I was in summer school. I was enrolled in 2 colleges at once at one semester. It was like an insane time. I don't know how I did it because I don't have that energy now.
I mean, you put in the hard work so that hopefully you don't have to do that again now.
That's kind of what I'm hoping. Yeah. At one point, I
Okay.
was taking 24 credits. It was like absolutely insane.
That's wild. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Okay. And so learning color then, from my understanding, what would you define your business as? Like, is it a social media company? Is it like a marketing? Like, what would you call it?
I have wondered that over the years. I call it an education blog and store, primarily for middle school history, but I have a little bit of everything on there.
Okay. Oh, so it continues to be the blog. Is it still neon green?
No, it changed. Yes, I got some graphic design skills on me, and I realized that this color is too bold. And for a while, it was like hot pink too, because of course, like I gotta try all the neon.
Yeah, that's so funny. Okay, so that's really cool that you were able to do that since the age of 14. That's so wild. So now it's been like over a decade,
Yeah, it's been 12 years now. I feel so old.
but you're not. You're definitely not old, trust me.
It's crazy when people are talking about social media trends. I'm like, well, back in my day, we had a chronological algorithm, and I'm like, oh my god, why did I just say those words?
I don't think you're fooling anyone into thinking you're old, even with those words.
Like, oh my goodness, I've been in this a long time, and the social media landscape has changed so much. And
Yeah.
I like consuming TikToks and Reels, but I just don't like creating them, and so that's kind of why I'm phasing out of that too. Is just because I mean I can do it, it's just not where I find my natural comforts and interests. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also really interesting because you started by saying like the first client you had, you helped her build her Pinterest. And like
mhm.
although I still think of Pinterest every now and then, it's definitely like not top of mind anymore in terms of like
No,
one of the social media places I go to.
yeah,
Um, I'm like, when do I go to Pinterest? It's kind of like, oh, I'm looking for, I don't know, outfit inspiration, maybe.
yeah,
But otherwise, I like don't have a reason, or like maybe like DIY craft inspiration, but I
yeah,
very, very rarely go. And I've never actually thought about wanting to grow my influence on Pinterest. Like I always thought it was just
yeah.
something you pinned for yourself. So that's also really interesting that you've dabbled into that as well.
At my peak, I think I was reaching 7 million people a month on Pinterest.
Wow. That's so
So, but
interesting.
this was
Wow.
back in like 2016, 2017. Like this was a long time
The peak of
ago.
Pinterest.
Yeah, and then during quarantine, of course, like everything had like skyrocketed. I had some random Christmas posts go viral. And that was really interesting because those are my first posts that were to grow outside of the education niche. They had hit the entirety of Pinterest. Um,
Mm.
so that was like an interesting thing to see. But yeah, it seems so antiquated now because I haven't been hired to run someone's Pinterest in like years.
Wait, so then is Learn and Color still heavily focused on your interest in history? Like, are you still a history buff and is that still like a big chunk of what you do?
Absolutely, yes. I visited a library for the first time in several months, a few days ago, and there were all these books on display, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to make book guides from that. So, like I mentioned, I grew up in Indiana, and the curriculums were very diverse at the time. When I was growing up, I used a very Christian-centric curriculum, which was even less diverse, and I really needed to hear from other voices. And like it was interesting because if you were to ask me like 12 years ago, is diversity important? I would tell you, no, it's not that important. I'm comfortable with the skin I'm in. But as I started getting exposed to these other different cultures, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so much more comfortable with it. I was fine then, but now I'm actually thriving. And the difference in that has been absolutely insane. And I'm like, if there's like this, recently there was a book, I don't remember the title of it. Eyes That Kiss in the Corners. It was written by an Asian woman, and it was talking about Asian eyes, and she just
Mm,
talks about her eyes that kiss in the corners, that unlike other people's eyes, and like that just meant so much to me as an adult reading that. And then there's books focusing on black hair care or Mexican heritage, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love seeing that diversity, not only from as an Asian woman reading about other Asian women, but also reading about like Latino cultures, Black cultures, Native American cultures, and getting like learning about their experiences. So a lot of my resources focus on minority voices and minority experiences, even though that is not how I originally intended it. It just followed my
mm-hmm.
interest. And I created book and movie guides and curriculum supplements focusing on those. So I'll take a book like Eyes That Kiss in the Corner or the movie Hidden Figures, and I will make a history lesson out of it. And teachers were liking those resources because they were able to
Mm,
easily incorporate them into their lesson plans. At the time, I was not selling curriculum, I was just selling supplements. So I was not competing with curriculums in any way. It was just a
okay.
supplement and an add on. It was something that could be done in a after school setting or a summer school setting. I had one lady who used my Pursuit of Happiness movie guide in a juvenile correctional facility, and she said that her students struggle with work ethic, but watching it actually made them think about the future, and that meant a lot to me because
Yeah.
again, it's a story of a Black man who grew up in poverty, who was homeless, and ended up becoming like a millionaire at the end of the movie. And it's a true story. And so I love like highlighting those voices and showing kids like, hey, you know, it is possible no matter what your circumstances are and no matter where you come
Yeah. And I mean, I think you are a great example of also like an incredible story, right? Like
from.
coming from your circumstances and getting to where you are today, and like you did it all by yourself, essentially, right?
Yeah,
Because you had mentioned like you didn't have a lot of parental backing, and
no,
so I guess without that parental backing, I think most of us have the luxury of that when we want to pursue nomadic life and want to pursue our dreams, even, right? Most of
yeah,
our parents, even if they're like, I hope you become a doctor and you don't become a doctor, at
yeah,
least they're still like, okay, well, you're happy and healthy. Like, I'm glad you're, just pursuing school.
yeah.
But maybe you had a different experience at home. So do you want to talk a little bit about how not having parental backing influenced you?
Yeah, I think the biggest way it influenced me is I know if I fail, I do not have a backup plan. And I think that's motivated me a lot more. I know a lot of friends who, let's say, boyfriend broke up, they didn't have a job, so they were able to move back in with their parents, even though they don't really get along with their parents. It was an option. Um, for me, that just was not an option. Even if like they lived in California, that just would not be an option. It's yeah. So as I said, my parents are still like involved in that call, and they think I'm living in sin, and it's just like it's a whole thing, and so it's just not an option for me. And I think that that has been the most difficult in all of my planning. I recently had an argument with this guy, and he was like, "Hey, you know, you could technically afford an apartment." And I said, you know, I'd rather put that money into savings for the long term. Recently, his car had broken down, and he needed $6,000, and he already had a bunch of credit card debt. Who did he go to? His mother for the $6,000 to fix his car. And I said, you have those luxuries. I do not have those luxuries. He was
Mm-hmm.
jobless for several months and he was able to figure it out. But if that he wouldn't have gotten a job, he would have had to go home. And I just don't have that luxury. So I think that that's one of the biggest things it has like forced me into, I guess, in the way I'm living right now. I'm pretty steady with everything, but I'd rather be a lot more comfortable in, I don't want to say poverty, but in poverty, than the opposite side. I've noticed that in every aspect of my life. Like I'm just more comfortable being like very minimalist, being ready to pack up and leave at any time in any period, in
Okay.
case I need to.
Yeah. Okay. We don't have to get into any numbers, of course, but I'm curious. So, like, what are the
Yeah.
sources and streams of income that help you sustain yourself financially right now?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness. I had written this down. Dog sitting was about a third of my income. So at so previously, like 2021-ish, I was almost making six figures with learning color and my VA work. It was like $30,000. I mean, yeah, $20,000 is short of six figures. So I was pretty close to that. But I was never able to get it, sadly. Hopefully in the future. But right now, a couple things happened with the blog that yeah, a couple things happened with that. I had gotten hacked and I didn't realize it for 4 months.
Oh no.
Just because the hack was like sporadic and it wasn't happening every time I was on the site. So that ended up knocking down a significant amount of my traffic. And then with just this changing landscapes of AI, just some of the numbers have gone down. So because of that, dog sitting is about a third of my income. Learning color is still like a little like about half, like 40-ish. 40% of my income. And then I was taking on some random part-time jobs, like VA type jobs, around the community. And then that was the rest of my income, whatever that is, like 20
VA
or
being virtual
30%.
assistant?
Yeah, I've been doing some virtual assistant work and I had some part-time gigs, like contract gigs for like local businesses in the community.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I think when life throws different circumstances at you, you
Mhm.
kind of have to figure it out, right? You gotta see what you can
Exactly. Yeah.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you've definitely found something that seems to be working for you.
Yeah, for the time being. I feel like one day I'll probably get tired of it, and I am starting to wear it. Like I miss my clothes, I miss my kitchen supplies, but for now it's working. So if it's not
Okay.
broke, I'm not gonna fix it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That being said, you are considering corporate.
Yeah.
And so what's been the mindset around that, and tell us why you're pursuing that?
More stability, like you mentioned, like I mentioned earlier. So most of my travels have been in the past 3 4 years. I have been living out of a backpack for most of that, and I feel like I reached a point where I've been able to see everything I wanted to see growing up. That I had this huge, I have all these big dreams. I wanted to visit Denmark and Sweden because I had read about them. I wanted to visit Asia. I speak Spanish, so I've been dying to visit Latin America and all those countries that I could not wait to visit that were just in my blood and just ready for it. 2022 gave me the courage to say, hey, you can do anything you put your mind to. You do not have to be afraid of the world. And I went for it. And so since then, I got it all out of my system, and I'm like, okay, all the countries that I have left next are like nice to have. They're something that I
Yeah.
would like to have, but they're not something that I am dying, like I'm dreaming about every single night
Yeah.
before I go to
Yeah.
bed. And so I hit all of those. And so the past like year has been me trying to like transfer into the corporate world, something more stable. I am wanting to buy a house out here, but I realized on my income and just the way it's structured, um, that's probably not going to happen. So I'm like, okay, a corporate job wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And I think I have hit the limit I am able to grow as an entrepreneur personally.
Okay.
I love like the collaborations that I've been able to have with other entrepreneurs. Like Emily, our conversations have been invaluable, but I'm looking for something where I can learn from a team of people and we're all working on the same project,
Mm-hmm.
especially those who are not entrepreneurs and those who are outside of my discipline. So that's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the most is that collaboration
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
from other people that I just can't get as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest complaint I hear about from people who either work remotely or work by themselves. It's
Yeah.
like they miss that, bouncing ideas off of each other. They miss the social aspect as well. And
Yeah.
so there are like pros and cons to each one of these options, of course.
Yeah. It can be
Yeah,
very isolating, like especially
completely.
during quarantine. I was working the entire time, so I didn't notice it. But afterward, I just started having like breaks in my schedule. I'm like, hey, I'm kind of lonely. I'm like in my room all day, and then that's why I adopted like the dog. Um, After that, and so I'm like, yeah, I feel like it's good to have community and it's good to have people to bounce ideas off of.
Hmm. During all your travels over the last few years, like, have you thought about would you want to pursue something more stable, but like be based out of somewhere else?
Yes. Yes. So the only other city that I've greatly considered is Mexico City. I absolutely love it. It's so vibrant. I dance bachata, and I had found this very interesting niche Asian bachata community in Mexico City, and I absolutely loved it. I did not know there were Asians dancing bachata in Mexico City, and it just made me so happy because it was an intersection of like all of my favorite things in life. When I traveled in Asia, I had felt like a bit of an anomaly because I had gotten asked, like, "Are you Chinese?" I said yes. Like, do you speak Mandarin? No, did your parents not teach you Mandarin? Then it goes on to this whole thing. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
adopted. And then I'm just like, I don't want to talk about this. Um, but in, Mexico City, like no one just questions it. They're just like, oh, okay, whatever. And the Latino community is so welcoming. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So, I mean,
especially I
I
think if
love
you speak
LA.
Spanish too, that helps too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Um, yeah.
I actually think it's really funny timing that you brought up Mexico City because it's one of the destinations I'm heading to during my upcoming trip. I'm leaving in two
Okay.
days, but I'm
Oh,
going to go
nice.
to Colombia, Peru, and specifically Mexico City.
Okay.
Mostly logistically because I wanted to go to Bolivia after going to Peru because it's the neighboring
Yeah.
country.
Same.
But then the logistics of the flights coming home just made no sense. So I was like, let's go still somewhere where it's Spanish speaking and I can enjoy Latin culture, but it's like on the way home. And so the next
Yes.
logical thing was let's go to Mexico. And
Yes.
every single person that I have brought up Mexico City to has been either like who's been has been like you're gonna love it, or
Yes.
everyone who hasn't been is like I've always wanted to go. And so
Hmm.
I'm really excited because I've heard nothing but good things. It's one of those places that everyone is so excited about.
Yeah, I think it's so vibrant. The communities are absolutely incredible. The food's incredible. When are you going? When will you be there?
I will be there near the like the second week of March.
Message me because I actually might be there too at the same
Okay,
time.
I'll see you and do some bachata with you. Okay.
Yes, please. The instructor is Asian. Like, yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, he had actually moved from Japan. He felt like he didn't really fit in Japan, and he moved from Japan to Mexico City to teach bachata. So it was really interesting. I met multiple people that only spoke like their language in Asia and Spanish. So that was super strange for me. Like the
Wow.
person didn't speak English and I was speaking to them in this like third language that they spoke or like in my second language. So that was very interesting.
And what an interesting story for the instructor too of like you don't feel at home in your culture where you grew up and like where your people are, quote
Yeah.
unquote. And then you move somewhere so different and then so vibrant as you say and it's like extremely opposite to what I consider Japan to be. And so
Yeah.
then he feels more at home there. That's like wonderful.
Yeah, it was just, yeah, I just like love the people there. I think the diversity is on par with like LA or New York City.
Okay. That's amazing. Yeah, actually, you mentioned diversity earlier, and I forgot to ask. It's like one of those things that I also really value now because
Mhm.
I just spent the last year and a half living in Taiwan, and I've loved it there.
Mhm.
There's a lot of there's quite a it's both large but small foreigner community because Taiwan
Yeah.
is like as a country is so small. So like
Yeah.
relative to other cities, it's small, but like I still think there are a lot of foreigners there. But the thing is, obviously, the main majority in population is Taiwanese. And so when
Mhm.
you're walking around, it feels very homogenous, like everyone
Yes.
is Taiwanese, versus like I came back to Toronto this time and I haven't been back in like almost 2 years in Toronto. And my favorite thing that I always tell people when I'm traveling around is my favorite thing about being from Toronto is when I get on the subway, I can hear like five different languages being spoken
Yeah.
around me
Mhm.
because everyone is from everywhere. Everyone from everywhere has immigrated to
Yeah.
Canada or is studying here or working here. And so I'll hear Ukrainian, I'll hear Farsi, I'll hear French, I'll hear like whatever. And it's
Mhm.
really like something I really love. And then the thing that I was craving when I was away is everyone's like, "Oh, what Canadian food do you crave?" And I was like, "I don't really know what Canadian food is, I'll be
Food.
perfectly honest."
Tim Hortons.
Yeah, Tim Hortons. But like the thing that I crave is the diversity of food that we have here. Like I have access to like Indian food, Ethiopian food, Mexican food, like, and it's all really quality, tastes really local. Like I
Yeah.
love that. And so I really missed that while I was away. So I also think diversity is like super important to me now.
Absolutely, and not only the diversity of, like, skin colors and cultures, but for me, the diversity of opinions and thought was really important.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
love, like, the Bay community, and everyone is very diverse there. I was wondering, like, what I was missing in the Bay Area for it to feel like home, but I realized everyone is talking about tech. They're all talking in all these different languages, but they're always talking about work and AI, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you guys have, like, other hobbies or interests?" Um, Lots of great people in the Bay Area. But I think that like for me, like that was kind of like I'm like, yes, I love talking about this, but I can also talk about other things too.
Yes.
But that's
Yes.
what I love about LA is I've struck up so many conversations with just like random people. I remember I was in a hot tub one time and I was like overhearing conversation. We are talking about this show, Is It Cake? And I got into a very passionate discussion and it ended up this guy was telling me a story about how the first 9 months he lived in LA, he was competing at game shows because he couldn't find a job. And so he was just going on all these game shows for his income. But I love like hearing all those like super like random weird stories. Like you'll always meet somebody in LA that has like a very interesting story. And I feel like my story is kind of all over the place. And so I just fit in perfectly with the LA vibe.
That's so good. Yeah, for me, it's always about the people. It doesn't matter what I'm doing or where I'm going. Like,
Exactly.
whenever I meet people, I'm always thinking like everyone has an interesting story because everyone lives such a different life and a unique life. And so it just depends really how they want to word it or how they view their own story. Some people are like, "Oh, I live a boring life." But then they start talking and I'm like, "I've never done any of the things you've done." Right? Like that's super interesting to me,
Yeah.
right? And so I always think people are so interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I love travel is like you expand your like your networks even further. Like there's been so many people I've met up with when I'm traveling and I was able to meet up with them again. So like that was
Yeah.
super cool to be able to have those connections like around the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what you're saying about like diverse perspectives and opinions, like there's this term that was introduced to me maybe last year from another book called something about like making sure you make the most of your 20s. I don't remember the title of this book.
Oh, I
I'll
feel
find
like
it
I
later.
remember.
It sounds
I think I
familiar,
know what you're
right?
talking about. Yeah.
Right? Anyways, they introduced a term, I think it's called like weak ties. And so
Okay.
essentially the people in your life that are closest to you are your strong ties. And then the people who just like pass through your life or you're just meeting, you don't know very well, probably like acquaintances are considered weak ties.
Yeah.
But they really emphasize how important it is to foster those relationships and stay connected with those people because the people closest to you, they often have a similar mentality and mindset to you. And so think similarly. Like they
Oh,
probably
yeah.
agree with you on a lot of things because that's why you get along. But
Yeah.
then when you talk to weak ties, they often have very differing opinions and they come from different upbringings and different cultures. And so you get a totally different perspective from them.
Hmm.
So it's like really important to also foster those relationships because you don't want to always have like yes men in your corner per se. You know, everyone is always in
Yeah.
agreement, but it's good to have a little bit of like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So it's important to foster those ties too, which is, I think, also part of why I love talking to strangers and talking to new people and getting to know new people,
Yeah.
because I always feel like I learn something new from them.
Oh, I absolutely love that. I have never heard of that before, but I think very similarly to that, not in those like exact terms, but usually when I find people that I really want to connect with, I follow them on Instagram, and that's how I've been able to meet up with the people
Hmm.
for the second or third time. I had met several Asians in Latin America who are from Asia, and then I had met most of them on my trip, which was a lot of fun. That's actually how I met my current boyfriend. My friend had met up with him in Italy, and then we all got together in Mexico City, and we're like, "Hey," I'm like, "Hey, you're pretty cool." But I love keeping those like people like in my back corner. Being in LA, when I had an apartment, I had several people that I had met along my journey say, "Hey, I have a layover in LA." I'm like, "I have a free couch. You're more than welcome to stay here." And so that's another thing I love about LA is people are always stopping by here, even if it's
True.
just for a layover. And I'm always more than happy to help.
Definitely a hub for travelers.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. We'll wrap things up soon. I think we just have one last question, which is just I want to ask you about what you're working towards this year. What are your goals and what are you hoping to achieve? So let's talk a little bit about 2025.
Yes, for 2025, I am really focusing on my gosh, what am I focusing on? This was actually my first year in 5 years I did not set a New Year's resolution, mainly
Oh,
because I really couldn't think of anything. In the past, all my New Year's resolutions have been something I have complete control over. So last year, my New Year's resolution was bachata. I wanted to be able
okay.
to get through a 4-minute bachata dance without like fumbling the whole thing, and I was able to do
Mm,
that. This year it would be getting a full-time job, but I realized that that's kind of outside of my doing to a certain extent.
yeah,
It has
yeah.
to, like it's not something I can easily be like, oh, okay, like this is there's an A to B.
Yeah, and
I
it's
don't
not
know.
like you could be like, by my March 1st, I'd like to have a role in this position or whatever, right? Yeah, at this company.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like previously, like they were like have a 30-minute Spanish conversation, hit X amount of income, and I was able to control those all pretty well. But with this is just kind of like, hey, I guess that's my main goal. There are a few countries that I would like to check off. I'm at 23 countries, I think, so I'd like to hit at least 25. I am prioritizing a lot less solo travel and prioritizing travel with friends more. So as we're talking with cheap tickets, we found a ticket from Beijing to Turkey for $250. So I think we'll be taking
That's
advantage of that.
wild. That's unheard of.
Yeah, so I think my friends and I will be taking advantage of that, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, I guess those were my goals.
No, that's great. I wanted to ask, like, does it make you feel uneasy at all that this is the first year you didn't set goals, or you're feeling good about that?
um, it does make me uneasy and uncomfortable. I'm very goal oriented, and like when I set goals, I like achieve them. And yeah, so I feel like that's the one like positive about me not setting a goal is it could go anywhere. There's a lot of variables in my life right now, just like things that could go anywhere. I could see myself living nomadically. I could see myself like getting an apartment. I could see myself moving to Mexico City.
Mhm.
And so right now, like the sky's the limit. And so it's
Yeah.
just like there's external factors that I don't really have fully control over that will decide all of those. So we'll see what
Yeah.
happens. I don't know.
Yeah. You just got to go
This
with
is
the
good for my
flow.
anxiety. Yeah.
My favorite thing I learned, like my favorite line I learned a few years ago was, I like to go with the flow. Just let me know what time the flow starts.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. As long as I know exactly what the flow is, I'm 100% cool with
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, I feel like we're on the same wavelength here. That's definitely my personality as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much for spending the time today. Thank you to Samantha. Thank you for all who have tuned in to watch, and we will catch you all in March. Yeah, March. Okay. Thank
All right.
you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justine.